Next, our speaker is Dominic Hannigan. Dominic, please, floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Chairman, fellow parliamentarians, let me begin by thanking the Lithuanian presidency for placing this topic on the agenda of today's COSAC. I'm very pleased to be here and to be able to share my thoughts with you. Recent reports by the Commission and by President Van Rompuy have intensified the debate and emphasised the need for greater democratic legitimacy and accountability to accompany further integration in EMU. And in doing so, they have shone a light on the role of parliaments in the European Union, and I would argue they've raised expectations that we would begin to address the worsening democratic deficit that exists across the Union. Because none of us here can be in any doubt at all that over the last number of years, trust and belief in European institutions has reduced. Just look, for instance, at the turnout at the European Parliament elections. In 1979, it was 62%. But in each election since then, this has reduced gradually. And in the last election, in 2009, it stood at just 43%. Now, how much of this drop is due to the fact that people don't know who they're voting for, because of the list system, or because the person they vote for hands over their seat to a substitute during the Parliament's term? And the worrying trend here for many is that the turnout and buy-in to the European Parliament is actually reducing, while simultaneously we're actually giving more power to the Parliament. And at the same time, national parliaments are concerned about a perceived transfer of powers away from them. I say perceived because treaties such as the Treaty of Lisbon and the Treaty on Stability, Coordination and Governance, the Fiscal Compact, have clearly set out roles for national parliaments in a bid to improve democratic legitimacy. But these positive developments have been undermined and overtaken to a certain extent by the executive-driven measures that were needed in the midst of the financial crisis. Undermined because the key tools that the European institutions have introduced to address the crisis, the six-pack and the two-pack, have alienated the average citizen even more from the decision-making process. And this disconnect is compounded by the complexity of the issues that we're faced with. The speed of change, combined with the measures introduced to deal with the crisis without popular debate, have heightened the belief that Europe is not improving the lives of our citizens and indeed is somewhat complicit in the austerity faced by many of our peoples. And this disconnect has been allowed to grow. No one in a position of power in Europe has really attempted to communicate with citizens or present them with a roadmap out of the crisis or offer them a vision for the future. Not President Van Rompuy, not Barroso, not anybody from the European Parliament. And why is this? Why is it that the leaders of the European institutions seem unwilling to speak or unable to reach European citizens? Is it because deep down they recognise that their mandate is one step removed from the ordinary citizens and they're not accepted as their leaders? That in fact the point of reference for citizens is first their national leaders and national parliamentarians. And the failure to communicate is a problem for all those who believe in Europe. It's leading to a rise in anti-European sentiment, a reduction in support for European institutions, a further decrease in engagement in elections pertaining to Europe. And in time, it will mean that future referenda on treaty changes or on enlargement or on in-out options, they'll all prove harder to win. Trust will not be regained until we recognise these issues and work to address them. Some work is already underway to improve the situation. At the Dublin plenary in June, COSAC welcomed the Commission proposals on next year's European parliamentary elections. Now, these elections give us a real opportunity to talk about a vision for Europe, to talk about the future of Europe. But the danger exists that candidates will run local campaigns, arguing for votes on the basis of what they'll stop Europe from doing, as opposed to what they will get Europe to do for their citizens. There's also the danger that the European parliamentary elections are seen as a mid-term referendum on the performance of the respective national governments. So we need to be bold about how these campaigns are undertaken. What can we do? Well, some of the suggestions have already been made by parliaments in their contribution to COSAC's 20th biannual report, which is contained in your packs today. We may have to look at treaty changes. For instance, we could ban national party logos from all election literature and adverts. We could make reimbursement of election funds contingent on having a minimum percentage of literature devoted to purely European issues. We could reduce the number of MEPs on the list system. We could remove the ability to appoint substitute MEPs. If an MEP resigns or dies, a by-election would be held. We all welcome the proposals that the President of the Commission will come from the largest party in the European Parliament. And during the next campaign, we need the lead candidates of the parties to be fighting from the front, appearing on TV programmes across the Union to spell out their vision of Europe and to tell us how their political groupings will improve the lives of the European citizen. Changes such as these will help to improve the democratic legitimacy in these institutions. And at a national level, we need to ensure that European roles of national parliaments are maintained and made more effective. There are a number of areas where this can be improved. Firstly, the system whereby national parliaments make reasoned opinions needs to be used more. And as an example, the Commission recently published proposals on the social dimension of the EMU, under which social indicators such as long-term unemployment, such as household disposable income and the like, that they be monitored in each country. My committee in Dublin will be debating these issues with key organisations in Ireland to get their views and to get their comments, and from that to provide a reasoned opinion on this matter to the European Union institutions. Secondly, the procedures in relation to the use of yellow cards and orange cards, that needs to be improved. For instance, in relation to the content and timing of responses from the Commission. Thirdly, we need to enhance the communication between national parliaments and the Commission through an increased number of appearances by commissioners to national parliaments during the European semester process. And I think video conferencing would be the minimum standard for this. Fourthly, we need to see more bilateral and multilateral meetings between member parliaments. What we're doing here at COSAC is an excellent example of this, and I note the positive response to these meetings that was contained in the COSAC biannual report. But parliaments need to make greater use of existing tools such as these, as well as trying to find new ways in order to address the changing environment. For instance, as Ava said, we need to consider giving the parliaments the right to initiate legislation. I think that needs to be looked at. And in another area, in relation to economic governance, national parliaments need to work with the European Parliament and ensure we maximise the parliamentary architecture to give effect to the political oversight of the new European semester. Now, I have to admit that I've attended many COSACs, and I've attended the recent Article 13 conference on the fiscal compact here in Lithuania a couple of weeks ago. And they've been in conflict mode. Conflict between the national parliaments themselves, and conflict also between the national parliaments and the European Parliament. And I say this because I believe that there must be a better way to make progress on the design of the oversight architecture. And we must, of course, also ensure that the architecture is adequately supported by a functioning secretariat. Now, some people have called for a special assembly, a new body that will be set up like an upper house of the European Parliament, populated by national parliamentarians to address the democratic deficit. But if we already have at national levels the powers of oversight, the right to discussion, the ability to comment, and indeed potentially introduce legislation, then another chamber may not actually be necessary because we'll have those powers ourselves. So I would hope that we can make progress in these areas in the near future through discussions such as the one that we're having today. Friends, we've seen considerable change at the European level in the last decade. Monetary union, the enlargement process, pooling of economic sovereignty. And these changes have often happened at breakneck speed. The European citizen has not been able to keep up with the pace of change that we're seeing. So we need to take stock now. We need to address how we can win back the trust of our European citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dominic.